My stepfather dragged me out of bed at 2:00 a.m. to see his prized car wrapped around the oak tree. Kyle stood there, feigning shock, and told them I stole the keys. I lost my freedom and my future that night, but I set a trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The pounding on my bedroom door wasn't just a knock, it was a promise of violence. It shook the frame, rattling the family photos hanging in the hallway, and jolted me from a deep, dreamless sleep. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage, before I could even register the time. The digital clock glowed a menacing 2:14 a.m. Maya, get out here now. The voice belonged to David, my stepfather. In the 8 years he had been married to my mother, I had heard him angry when the football game didn't go his way or when a client dropped his firm. But I had never heard this primal, throat-shredding roar directed at me. I stumbled out of bed, my legs tangled in the sheets, my breath catching in my throat. I was wearing only an oversized t-shirt and shorts, shivering not from cold, but from a sudden, plunging dread. I opened the door, and the hallway light blinded me. David was there, his face a contorted mask of purple rage, a vein throbbing dangerously in his temple. David, what's... He didn't let me finish. He didn't even look at me like a person. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my bicep hard enough to bruise, and yanked me toward the stairs. "Don't you play dumb with me, don't you dare," he spat, his breath smelling of stale coffee and fury. "I don't know what's happening," I cried out, trying to find my footing as he practically dragged me down the stairs. "Mom, Mom." I saw my mother standing at the bottom of the staircase. She was wrapped in her robe, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale and streaked with tears. She didn't reach out for me. She didn't tell David to let go. She just looked at the floor, unable to meet my eyes. That was the first knife in my heart. David shoved me through the front door and out onto the porch. The humid night air hit me, but it was the sight in the driveway that froze the blood in my veins. David's pride and joy, his brand-new, custom-ordered Dodge Challenger, the Black Ghost edition he had waited 2 years to receive, was destroyed. The front hood was crumpled like a piece of tin foil, wrapped intimately around the trunk of the massive oak tree that lined our driveway. Steam hissed from the shattered radiator, rising into the night sky like a ghost. And standing next to it, looking impeccably tragic, was Kyle. My stepbrother. He was pacing back and forth, running his hands through his hair, shaking his head. When he saw me, he stopped. He looked at David, then at me, and his eyes widened with a performance so perfect it belonged on Broadway. "I tried to stop her, Dad," Kyle said, his voice trembling with faux adrenaline. "I heard the engine start and I ran out, but she peeled out. She was laughing, Dad, she was laughing." My jaw dropped. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What? Kyle, what are you talking about? I was asleep. I've been asleep since 10. David spun on me, his finger inches from my nose. "Liar, you've been jealous of this car since the day I ordered it. You think because I told you that you couldn't drive it, you'd take it for a joyride to spite me? Is that it?" "No, David, please, look at me. I don't even have my contacts in. I can't see 3 feet in front of me," I pleaded, gesturing to my squinting eyes. "Why would I drive your car? I don't even like muscle cars." "Save it," David screamed, the sound echoing off the neighbor's house. "Kyle saw you. He saw you jump out and run inside the back door." I looked at Kyle. He offered me a sad, pitying look, the kind you give a sick animal. "Maya, just admit it. You were swerving all over. You almost hit me. I know you're stressed about finals, but this..." He gestured helplessly at the wreckage. "I didn't do this," I screamed, my voice cracking. I turned to my mother, who had followed us onto the porch. "Mom, please, you know I was in my room. You came in to say goodnight." My mother finally looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was hard. Fear makes people do terrible things, and she was terrified of David's temper. She was terrified of losing the lifestyle he provided. And in that moment, she chose her survival over her daughter. Maya, she whispered, her voice trembling. Just tell David the truth so we can handle this. I am telling the truth, I sobbed, collapsing onto the cold concrete of the porch steps. The injustice of it was a physical weight, pressing the air out of my lungs. I looked at the twisted metal, then at Kyle's clean shoes, then at my mother's averted gaze. David loomed over me, his shadow stretching long and dark across the driveway. You are going to pay for every cent of this. I don't care if it takes you the rest of your life. The silence from my mother hurt worse than David's screaming ever could. The next 3 days were a blur of hushed whispers and suffocating tension. I was a ghost in my own home, confined to my room except for meals, which I ate in silence while David glared at the top of my head and Kyle played with his phone, suppressing smirks. I tried to investigate. I tried to go out to the driveway to look at the skid marks, to see if there was any evidence I could find, but David had forbidden me from going near the scene of the crime. On Saturday morning, the judgment was handed down. I was summoned to the dining room table. David sat at the head, a notepad and calculator in front of him. My mother sat to his right, looking like she was attending a funeral. Kyle was leaning against the kitchen counter, sipping an energy drink, looking like a bored spectator at a traffic court hearing. Sit, David commanded. I sat. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to clamp them between my knees. I've spoken to the insurance, David began, his voice dangerously calm. Because you are a household member and an inexperienced driver who took the vehicle without permission, the rates are going to skyrocket. They might not even cover the full repair because of the negligence involved. The frame is bent, Maya. The frame. David, I swear to you. Silence, he slammed his hand on the table. I am done listening to your lies. We are moving past the did you do it phase. We are in the consequences phase. He pushed the notepad toward me. It was a list of figures. The deductible, the increased premium for the next 5 years, the depreciation value. It totals roughly $15,000, and that's a conservative estimate. I stared at the numbers, swimming through my tears. I don't have $15,000. No, David said, a cruel curl to his lip. But you have a college fund, or rather you had one. My head snapped up. What? I'm liquidating the savings account your mother and I set up, he stated flatly. It will cover the damages. That's my tuition, I gasped. That's 4 years of hard work. I have a partial scholarship, but I need that money for room and board. If you take that, I can't go to design school in the fall. You should have thought about that before you wrapped a $90,000 car around a tree, David said coldly. And that's not all. Obviously, you can't be trusted with freedom. You are grounded indefinitely. No going out with friends. No phone unless it's for emergencies. He paused, leaning in closer. And you will not be attending prom next week, or walking at your graduation ceremony. You can't do that. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. I'm valedictorian. I have to give a speech. I've worked my entire life for this. Then I guess they'll have to find a replacement, David said, not blinking. You are not going to be celebrated publicly when you act like a criminal privately. I turned to my mother, begging with my eyes. Mom, please, it's graduation. You can't let him take graduation. My mother squeezed her eyes shut, a tear escaping. Maya, you destroyed his car. We have to be fair. Kyle missed his graduation trip when he got in trouble a few years ago. Fair is fair. Fair, I choked out. Kyle got in trouble for a DUI. I was asleep in my bed. Don't bring me into this, Kyle piped up from the kitchen, his voice smooth. I owned up to my mistakes, Maya. Maybe it's time you grew up and did the same. The audacity knocked the wind out of me. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was wearing a brand new watch, one I hadn't seen before. He looked rested, healthy, and completely unburdened by conscience. Later that afternoon, a tow truck arrived to take the wreckage away. It was my Uncle Rob, my mother's brother. Rob was the black sheep of the family because he worked with his hands. He owned a collision center and a towing company. David looked down on him, but he called him because Rob gave him a family discount. I watched from my bedroom window as Rob hooked the mangled Challenger up to the flatbed. I saw David gesturing wildly, explaining the theft. I saw Rob nodding, his face unreadable. Then I saw Rob pause. He leaned into the wreckage, into the shattered cabin of the car. He stayed there for a long time, fiddling with something near the rearview mirror. When he pulled his head out, he looked up at the house. For a second, I thought he was looking right at me. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just patted his chest pocket and climbed into his truck. As they drove away, David came back inside, satisfied that the evidence of his humiliation was gone. But in his arrogance, in Kyle's laziness, they had forgotten one crucial thing about modern cars, and one crucial thing about Uncle Rob. To understand why they believed Kyle over me so easily, you have to understand the dynamic of our house. It was built on a foundation of David is always right, and Kyle is just finding himself. I was 10 when my dad died. My mom married David 2 years later. David was a high-powered corporate attorney, obsessed with image, status, and control. He didn't want a daughter, he wanted an audience. I learned quickly that the way to survive was to be perfect. Good grades, clean room, polite manners. I made myself small so I wouldn't be a target. I cooked dinners when Mom had migraines. I organized David's home office. I was the model stepdaughter, desperate for a shred of approval that never came. Then there was Kyle. Kyle was David's biological son from his first marriage. He was 19, a year older than me, and he was the sun around which David orbited. Kyle was handsome, charming, and utterly rotten to the core. He had flunked out of 3 different colleges in 2 years. Each time, David spun it as the school wasn't the right fit for his genius. Kyle was an entrepreneur, which apparently meant buying crypto with David's money and sleeping until noon. He had come to live with us 3 months ago after being asked to leave his apartment complex for unlisted reasons. Since he'd been back, the atmosphere in the house had shifted. He was like a poison gas, colorless, odorless, but slowly choking the life out of everything. He constantly made little comments about me. "Maya's looking a little heavy, isn't she? Does Maya really need a tutor? Seems like a waste of money." He was planting seeds of doubt in David's mind, positioning himself as the prudent observer and me as the drain on resources. But his eyes were always on the money. A week before the crash, I had walked into the kitchen to find Kyle going through the mail. He was holding one of my bank statements, the one for the college fund my grandmother had started for me, which David had taken over management of. "Looking for something?" I had asked, snatching it from his hand. Kyle had smiled, a slow, reptilian stretching of his lips. "Just making sure the family finances are in order, little sister. You have a lot of cash sitting there. Seems wasteful for it to just sit." "It's for design school," I said, putting it in my bag. "Right, art school," he scoffed. "Drawing pictures while the adults do business. Must be nice." He had turned his attention to the garage then. The Challenger had just been delivered. David treated that car better than he treated my mother. He wouldn't even let Mom drive it. "Too much horsepower," he'd said. "You can't handle the torque." Kyle, however, was obsessed. He spent hours in the garage, just sitting in the driver's seat, revving the engine when David wasn't home. I'd seen him more than once taking selfies with it, posting them with captions like "new whip" and "beast mode." "Dad said you can't drive it," I told him once when I caught him adjusting the mirrors. Kyle had looked at me through the windshield, his expression turning cold and flat. "Dad says a lot of things, but at the end of the day, it's his blood in my veins, not yours. Remember that, Maya. You're just a guest here." That was the person who stood in the driveway that night, acting the part of the concerned brother. The person who watched me cry as my dreams were stripped away. He wasn't just a spoiled brat, he was a predator. And he had just realized that by destroying the car, he could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. He could get the joyride he wanted, and he could free up my college money to pay for it. Money that I strongly suspected he planned to intercept eventually. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a helpless high school girl who would cry and accept her fate. He didn't know I was done crying. The night of my high school graduation was the quietest night of my life. I sat on the edge of my bed, the room dark save for the sliver of yellow light creeping in from the hallway. In the closet, my cap and gown hung in plastic, a ghost of the person I was supposed to be. Downstairs, I could hear the faint murmur of the television. David and Kyle were watching a game. My mother was likely in the kitchen, cleaning up the takeout containers from the dinner I wasn't allowed to join. I had spent 4 years studying until my eyes burned. I had volunteered, led clubs, and maintained a 4 GPA while managing the household chores David claimed were good for my character. I had written a valedictorian speech about resilience and the future. And now, my name was being read out in a gymnasium 5 miles away, and I wasn't there to hear it. I imagined the principal pausing at my name. Maya Lynn, the silence, the whispers in the crowd. Where is she? Did you hear she stole her stepdad's car? Did you hear? She went crazy. David had made sure the narrative was controlled. He had called the school and told them I was indisposed due to a severe disciplinary matter. He wanted me humiliated. He wanted to break me. I laid back on the pillow, staring at the ceiling, tears leaking from the corners of my eyes into my ears. It wasn't just the sadness, it was the impotence. I was 18, legally an adult, yet I felt like a prisoner in a fortress David had built out of money and rage. 3 days later, the routine had settled into a grim monotony. I was the maid. I scrubbed the floors, I dusted the blinds, I mowed the lawn in the blistering heat while Kyle sat on the porch, sipping iced tea and offering critiques on my edging work. "You missed a spot near the hydrangeas," he said, not even looking up from his phone. "Dad hates it when it looks sloppy." I wiped the sweat from my forehead with the back of my grimy glove. "Why are you doing this, Kyle? You know the truth." He finally looked at me, lowering his sunglasses. "The truth is whatever people believe, Maya, and right now, they believe you're a screw-up. It's actually better for you this way. Low expectations. You won't have to stress about that fancy design school anymore." He took a loud slurp of his tea. "Besides, that money is going to better use now." I gripped the handle of the mower until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to scream. I turned the machine back on, drowning out his voice. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday. David was at the firm, Kyle was out spending money he didn't have, and Mom was at her Pilates class. I was in the kitchen, aggressively scrubbing the grout on the countertops, when the back door opened. It was Uncle Rob. He was wearing his greasy coveralls, his name tag slightly askew. He held a clipboard in one hand and a thick manila envelope in the other. "Rob," I asked, standing up quickly, "David isn't here." "I know," Rob said. His voice was rough, like gravel in a mixer. He didn't step fully into the kitchen. He stayed by the door, glancing toward the hallway to make sure we were alone. "I told your mom I needed to drop off the total loss paperwork for the insurance. Needed a signature." "I can't sign anything," I said, feeling the familiar lump in my throat. "I'm not allowed to touch anything related to the car." Rob stepped closer. He placed the clipboard on the island, but instead of a pen, he pulled a small, silver USB drive from his pocket. He set it down on the granite with a soft clink. "The Challenger has a valet mode dashcam system," Rob said quietly, his eyes locking onto mine. "It records interior and exterior anytime the engine is running. It saves to an SD card tucked behind the rearview mirror housing." My heart stopped. "You found it." David didn't know it was there. He barely read the manual. "And Kyle?" Rob let out a short, dry chuckle. "Kyle was too busy staging the outside to worry about the inside." He tapped the USB drive. "I made a copy. I watched it, Maya." The air left the room. "You saw him." "I saw him steal the keys from David's jacket. I saw him driving like a maniac. I heard the tires squeal. I saw the moment he lost control and wrapped it around the oak. And Rob's jaw tightened, his face darkening with a protective anger I hadn't seen since my father died. I saw him drag you out of the house. I saw him laughing while he did it. Oh my God, I whispered, clutching the counter for support. You have to show David. You have to tell him right now. No, Rob said firmly. What? Why? Because if I show him now, he'll just explode. He'll be embarrassed. He might even try to bury it to protect his ego and his golden boy. David hates being wrong more than he hates losing money. Rob leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. We need to do this publicly. We need to do it in a way that he can't spin. He can't hide from it. The 4th of July cookout, I realized. Bingo, Rob said. The whole family is coming. Your mom's side, David's partners, the cousins, it's the perfect stage. He slid the USB drive into my hand. Hide this. Do not let anyone see it. I have the original, but you need to know you're safe. Can you hold on for 3 more weeks? Can you play the part? I closed my fingers around the cold metal of the drive. It felt like a weapon. It felt like salvation. I can do it, I said, a new strength surging through my veins. Good girl, Rob said. He grabbed the clipboard. Now, sign this dummy form so I have an excuse for being here. Possessing the truth changes you. Before Uncle Rob's visit, I was walking with my shoulders hunched, flinching at every loud noise, weighed down by the shame they had forced upon me. After Rob left, I stood taller. The fear evaporated, replaced by a cold, burning patience. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the hunter, waiting in the tall grass. I hid the USB drive inside the hollow rod of my closet C. Erting, a place neither David nor Kyle would ever look. Knowing it was there gave me a secret armor. The atmosphere in the house shifted, though David and Kyle were too self-absorbed to notice the subtleties immediately. I stopped pleading. I stopped crying at the dinner table. When David made snide comments about my criminal record, I didn't defend myself. I just nodded, a small, unreadable smile on my lips. This silence unnerved Kyle. A week after Rob's visit, I walked into the kitchen to find Kyle eating a bowl of cereal. He had his feet up on the table, something I would have been executed for, and was scrolling through Instagram. Move, he grunted, kicking his foot out to block my path to the fridge. I didn't step back. I looked at his expensive sneakers, then up at his face. You look tired, Kyle. Trouble sleeping. He scoffed. I sleep like a baby. Unlike you, I don't have a guilty conscience keeping me up. Is that so? I opened the fridge and grabbed a pitcher of water. I poured a glass slowly, letting the silence stretch. It's funny. I was reading about that car, the Black Ghost Edition. It has so many features. Kyle paused, his spoon hovering halfway to his mouth. So what? You wrecked it before you could figure them out. I heard it has sensors everywhere, I said, turning to face him, leaning casually against the counter. It tracks speed, braking, G-force. It's almost like a black box on an airplane. It records everything. Kyle lowered his spoon. The cocky smirk faltered for a fraction of a second. You don't know what you're talking about. The car is scrap metal. It's gone. Is it? I took a sip of water. Uncle Rob is pretty good with scrap metal. He says sometimes things survive the crash, things you wouldn't expect. Kyle slammed his spoon into the bowl, milk splashing onto the table. What are you trying to say, Maya? Nothing, I said lightly, washing my glass in the sink. Just that the truth has a funny way of surfacing, like a body floating to the top of a lake. He stood up, his chair screeching against the floor. He crossed the distance between us in 2 strides and loomed over me, using his height to intimidate. Listen to me, you little brat. You're done. You're finished. Dad hates you. Mom is too scared to help you. You have nothing. If you try to spread lies about me, I will make your life so miserable you'll wish you were in jail. His face was red, his eyes bulging. It wasn't the face of an innocent man defending his honor. It was the face of a guilty man terrified of being caught. I'm not spreading lies, Kyle, I said, my voice steady, my pulse calm. I don't have to. You're pathetic, he spat, but he backed away. He grabbed his keys off the counter, keys to David's secondary SUV that he was now allowed to drive, and stormed out of the house. As the door slammed, I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. He was rattled. I had poked the bear, and he had flinched. That evening, at dinner, the tension was palpable. Kyle was manic, talking too fast, laughing too loud at David's boring stories about contract law. He kept glancing at me, trying to read me, but I just ate my green beans and stared at the centerpiece. "So, David," Kyle said, his voice a little too high. "About the liquidity. When do you think the funds from Maya's account will clear? I was thinking, since I'm going to be helping you look for a new car, maybe we could use some of that cash to put a down payment on something really nice. An investment." David chewed his steak thoughtfully. "The bank is processing the withdrawal. It should be in the main account by the 1st of the month." "Great," Kyle said, a greedy light in his eyes. "That's great. We should move fast. The market is hot." I gripped my fork. He wasn't just satisfied with destroying my reputation. He was actively trying to spend my tuition money before the body was even cold. "Actually," David said, looking at me with disdain, "I was thinking we might use some of it to send Maya to that behavioral camp in Arizona, the one for troubled youth." My blood ran cold. "Whatever you think is best, Dad," Kyle said quickly. "As long as she's out of the house, right?" They were discussing my exile like I was a piece of furniture to be moved to storage. But they had made a mistake. They gave me a timeline. The 1st of the month. The cookout was on the 4th. I just had to survive until then. The week leading up to the 4th of July was a study in psychological warfare. Kyle, spooked by my comments in the kitchen, launched a campaign to discredit me further. He told David he caught me trying to hack into his laptop. He told my mother he found liquor bottles under my bed, which he had planted. David stripped my room. He took my books, my sketchpads, even my radio. I was left with a mattress, a lamp, and my clothes. "If you want to act like a criminal, you can live like one," David had sneered as he carried my art supplies out in a garbage bag. I didn't fight him. I didn't scream. Every item he took just added fuel to the fire burning inside me. I watched him throw my portfolio, my application portfolio for design school, into the trash compactor. I memorized the sound of the crunch. I stored it away to replay later. Meanwhile, I became invisible. I moved through the house like a phantom. But phantoms hear things. Late one night, 2 days before the party, I was downstairs getting a glass of water. I heard hushed voices coming from the back patio. The sliding door was cracked open a few inches to let in the summer breeze. It was Kyle. He was on the phone, his voice a harsh whisper. "I told you I'll have it next week. Back off, Marco." "No, listen. The old man is cashing out the stepsister's trust. It's heavy, like 40 grand. Yes, I can cover the debt plus the interest. Just don't call the house again. I swear, if you call the house, the deal is off." I froze in the shadows of the kitchen. Gambling, it had to be gambling. Kyle didn't just want the money for a new car, he needed it. He was in deep with someone named Marco. That explained the desperation. That explained why he needed a scapegoat so quickly. He had probably crashed the car because he was driving reckless, maybe even running from someone, or just high on the adrenaline of his own self-destruction. And when he hit that tree, he saw a way to wipe his slate clean using my life as the eraser. He hung up and kicked a patio chair, cursing under his breath. I retreated upstairs before he could see me, my heart pounding. The stakes had just escalated. If I didn't expose him on the 4th, that money would be gone, handed over to a bookie or a loan shark, and I would never see a dime of it again. The morning of the 4th of July arrived with oppressive heat. The sky was a bleached white, the air thick and sticky. "Maya," David barked from the bottom of the stairs at 8:00 a.m. "Get down here. You have work to do." I went down. The house was already buzzing with preparation. My mother was frantically arranging flowers. Kyle was outside setting up the cornhole boards, wearing a patriotic polo shirt, looking like the picture of the all-American son. "We have 50 people coming," David said, handing me an apron. You are to serve drinks and clear plates. You do not speak to the guests unless spoken to. You do not bring up the car. You do not complain. If I see one tear, if I hear one word of dissent, I will drive you to Arizona myself tonight. Do you understand?" "Yes, David," I said obediently, tying the apron around my waist. "And try to look less sullen," he added, gesturing vaguely at my face. "Nobody wants a downer at a party." By noon, the driveway was full. Cousins, aunts, uncles, and business partners filled the backyard. The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce filled the air. I circulated with a tray of lemonade, keeping my head down. "Is that Maya?" I heard my Aunt Linda whisper to my mother. "She looks gaunt." "She's having a hard time," my mother replied in a hushed tone, loudly enough for me to hear. "We're trying to help her through this rebellious phase, but it's been very difficult for David." "Poor David," Linda clucked. "And poor Kyle. It must be so hard for him to see his stepsister act out like this." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted copper. Wait, I told myself, just wait. At 2:00 p.m., Uncle Rob's truck pulled up. He didn't come alone. He brought his massive industrial smoker on a trailer, which was his contribution to the party, but I noticed he also carried a heavy-looking laptop bag over his shoulder. He caught my eye across the yard. He didn't smile. He gave a microscopic nod. Kyle was holding court near the cooler, a beer in one hand, surrounded by two of my younger male cousins. He was laughing, gesturing expansively. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. "Yeah, it was crazy," I heard him say as I walked by with a bag of trash. "Total loss, but honestly, it's for the best. Dad's gonna upgrade, and I think we all learned a lesson about responsibility." He winked at the cousins. They laughed. I walked to the trash can, deposited the bag, and turned to look at the patio. David had set up a large outdoor TV screen to watch the baseball game later. It was connected to a master HDMI cable that ran to a receiver on the patio table. Uncle Rob was already there, setting up his laptop near the receiver. "Hey Rob," David called out from the grill. "We watching the game?" "Yeah," Rob called back, his voice booming. "Just getting the stream set up. Want to make sure the resolution is good." I walked over to Rob. David was distracted by a flare-up on the grill. Kyle was busy lying to his admirers. "Is it time?" I whispered, pretending to hand Rob a napkin. Rob looked at me. His eyes were hard but kind. "Go stand by the screen, Maya. I want you to see their faces." He plugged the HDMI cable to his laptop. "Hey, everyone," Rob shouted, his voice cutting through the chatter of 50 people. "Before we get to the game, I wanted to show you guys a little highlight reel I put together, something really special." The conversation died down. People turned toward the screen, expecting a slideshow of family photos or maybe highlights of Kyle's achievements. Kyle strolled over, looking bored. David wiped his hands on a towel and smiled, expecting a tribute to himself. "What is this, Rob?" David asked, chuckling. "Just a little home movie," Rob said. He hit the spacebar. The screen flickered to life. It wasn't a slideshow. It was a wide-angle view of our driveway at night, grainy but clear, illuminated by the garage floodlights and the car's own interior glow. The timestamp in the corner read, June 12, 02:08 a.m. The chatter in the yard stopped instantly. On the screen, the driver's door opened. A figure jumped in. It wasn't me. It was Kyle. The silence that descended over the backyard was heavier than the humid July air. It was a vacuum, sucking the oxygen out of the lungs of every single person present. 50 guests, family, friends, business partners, stood frozen, their drinks halfway to their mouths, their eyes glued to the 60-inch screen. On the screen, the high-definition nightmare continued to play. We watched from the perspective of the rearview mirror. We saw Kyle's face illuminated by the dashboard lights. He wasn't panicked. He was euphoric. He was bobbing his head to music that thumped through the car's premium speakers, holding a lit cigarette in one hand, something David strictly forbade in any of his vehicles. "Man, this thing pulls." Kyle's voice came through the outdoor speakers, crystal clear. "Beast mode." In the yard, the real Kyle made a strangled noise. "Turn it off," he shrieked, his voice cracking. "Rob, turn it off. That's fake. That's AI." He lunged toward the table where the laptop sat, knocking over a pitcher of iced tea. But Uncle Rob, a man who spent his days wrestling rusted transmissions out of trucks, didn't even flinch. He simply stepped in front of the table, crossing his massive arms. He was a brick wall in grease-stained coveralls. "Sit down, Kyle," Rob rumbled. The authority in his voice was absolute. David hadn't moved. He was staring at the screen, his face draining of color until it looked like gray ash. His mouth was slightly open, his mind trying to reconcile the son he thought he knew with the stranger on the video. On screen, the world tilted. We heard the screech of tires, a long, agonizing wail followed by the sickening crunch of metal meeting oak. The camera shook violently, the image blurring for a second before stabilizing. The airbags deployed with a dusty explosion. Then silence on the tape, just the hiss of the radiator. We watched Kyle cough, bat away the airbag, and check himself in the mirror. He didn't check the car. He didn't call for help. He laughed. It was a nervous, breathy laugh, but it was a laugh. "Dad's gonna kill me," the video Kyle muttered. Then his eyes narrowed. We saw the gears turning. "Unless..." The crowd in the backyard gasped collectively as they watched Kyle deliberately wipe his fingerprints off the steering wheel with the hem of his shirt. We watched him exit the car, walk around to the front to inspect the damage, and then lean back into the window. "Maya," he whispered to himself, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Perfect." The video cut to black. In the backyard, the silence returned, but now it was charged with electricity. Every head turned slowly from the screen to the real Kyle, who was standing by the cooler, trembling. "It's a deepfake," Kyle stammered, his eyes darting around the yard looking for an ally. "Rob hates me, he always has. He used some computer program to put my face on it. Dad, you know technology, you know they can do this." David slowly turned his head. His eyes were no longer angry, they were dead. "Rob," David said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, "is there more?" "There's audio from the exterior," Rob said, "and the timestamp matches the security log from your house alarm system. The moment the front door opened. The moment Maya was dragged out." "It's a lie," Kyle screamed, backing away as his cousins stepped away from him, creating a circle of isolation. "Maya drove it. She's the one who wanted the money. She's the thief." I stepped forward then. My legs felt heavy, but my voice was steady. I walked past my mother, who was sobbing into her hands, and stood directly in front of David. "I didn't want the money, David," I said, my voice carrying across the silent yard. "I just wanted to go to school. But Kyle needs the money." Kyle's head snapped toward me. "Shut up, shut your mouth." "Tell him about Marco," I said, locking eyes with Kyle. Kyle's face went white. It was the reaction of a man watching the guillotine blade drop. "Who is Marco?" David asked, stepping off the patio onto the grass. He looked from me to Kyle. "I heard him on the phone the other night," I continued, addressing David but never taking my eyes off my stepbrother. "He owes $40,000 to a bookie named Marco. He told him he'd have it by next week because you were liquidating my college fund. That's why he framed me, David. He didn't just crash your car. He was stealing my future to pay for his gambling addiction." David stopped. He looked at Kyle, really looked at him for the first time in years. He saw the sweat, the twitching hands, the terror. He saw the new watch, the expensive clothes, the facade of success that David himself had paid for. "Kyle," David said, his voice trembling with a mix of rage and heartbreak, "is this true?" "Dad, she's lying, she's crazy," Kyle pleaded, reaching out a hand. "I'm your son, I'm your blood, you're going to believe this charity case over me." That was the breaking point. David didn't scream, he didn't roar. He walked up to Kyle, slapped his hand away, and got inches from his face. "She is not a charity case," David hissed, the the words dripping with venom. She is the only person in this house who hasn't lied to me. I raised you. I gave you everything. I covered for your grades, your DUIs, your business ventures. And you repay me by destroying my property, framing an innocent girl, and trying to embezzle money from me. Dad, please. Don't you dad me, David bellowed, the explosion finally coming. You aren't a victim, Kyle, you're a parasite. David turned to the crowd, his face red with humiliation but his posture rigid with resolve. The party is over. Everyone, please go home. I apologize for this. Then he turned back to Kyle, pointing a shaking finger at the driveway. You have 10 minutes to pack a bag, just your clothes, leave the laptop. Leave the keys to the SUV, leave the watch. Where am I supposed to go? Kyle cried, tears streaming down his face now, tears of self-pity, not remorse. I don't have anywhere to go. Marco will kill me. Then I suggest you drive fast, David said coldly. Oh, wait, you don't have a car. David pulled his phone from his pocket. I'm calling the police to file a report for grand theft, auto, and fraud. If you're still here when they arrive, you can explain it to them. Kyle looked at David, then at me. He opened his mouth to scream something else, something hateful, but the look on Uncle Rob's face, who was cracking his knuckles by the screen, stopped him. He turned and ran into the house. The exodus was swift. The guests, murmuring and casting pitying glances at my mother and me, cleared out within 15 minutes. The backyard, once festive with balloons and the smell of barbecue, now looked like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. Uncle Rob stayed. He sat on the edge of the patio, packing up his laptop. I sat on one of the folding chairs, my knees finally giving way. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me exhausted and hollow. My mother was sitting at the patio table, her head in her arms, weeping softly. David was pacing the grass, phone to his ear, barking legal terms to someone, presumably the police or his insurance agent. 10 minutes later, Kyle burst out of the back door, a duffel bag thrown over his shoulder. He looked wild. He didn't look at David. He looked at me. You think you won? He spat, his voice shaking. You ruined this family. I hope you're happy. You ruined yourself, Kyle, I said quietly. I just turned on the light. He sneered, turned on his heel, and ran around the side of the house. A minute later, we heard the sound of an Uber pulling up and driving away. He was gone. David ended his call and walked over to the patio. He looked older than he had that morning. The arrogance, the pristine lawyer armor, was dented. He stood in front of me, his hands in his pockets. He looked at the ground, then at the oak tree, and finally at me. I transferred the money back, he said. His voice was gruff, devoid of its usual polish. I called the bank while I was on hold with the precinct. The liquidation is canceled. Your fund is intact. I nodded, not trusting my voice. And David took a deep breath, looking like he was swallowing broken glass. I was wrong. I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have taken his word over yours. I should have investigated. You shouldn't have screamed at me, I said, the tears finally spilling over. You shouldn't have taken my graduation. You shouldn't have treated me like a criminal because it was easier than believing your son was a liar. David flinched. He knew it was true. I know, I can't give you graduation back. I can't give you prom back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys. Not to the destroyed Challenger, but to his daily driver, a luxury sedan. Take the car for the summer, he said, placing the keys on the table. Go see your friends, go wherever you want, I'll cover the gas. It was a buyout, a settlement offer, but it was also the closest thing to an apology David was capable of giving. My mother finally looked up. Her mascara was running, her face blotchy. She reached out and took my hand. Maya, I'm so sorry. I was so scared of the fighting. I failed you. I looked at them, two broken people trying to put the pieces back together. I realized then that I didn't need their validation anymore. I had found my own strength. I don't want the car, David, I said, standing up. And I don't want to stay here this summer. I'm going to go stay with Grandma until the semester starts. David nodded slowly. I understand. I'll have the tuition check sent directly to the school. Good, I said. I walked over to Uncle Rob, who was zipping up his bag. He stood up and pulled me into a bear hug that smelled of motor oil and brisket smoke. Proud of you, kid, he whispered. You held the line. Thanks to you, I said into his shoulder. Nah, Rob pulled back and winked. I just provided the tech, you provided the guts. Epilogue. 2 months later, I packed my bags for design school. I moved into my dorm room, a small, sunlit space that smelled of fresh paint and possibility. I pinned my acceptance letter to the corkboard, the one thing David hadn't been able to destroy. Things at home were quiet. David and my mother were in therapy, trying to figure out how their marriage survived the toxicity of enabling a narcissist. It wasn't perfect, but the screaming had stopped. As for Kyle, I heard through the family grapevine that Marco wasn't as forgiving as David. Kyle was apparently living in a motel 2 towns over, working under the table at a warehouse, trying to pay off his debt before his kneecaps got broken. The police report David filed meant he had a warrant out for fraud, so he couldn't get a legitimate job. He had gone from the golden child to a fugitive in the span of an afternoon. I sat at my new desk, opening my laptop, a gift from Uncle Rob. I opened a blank canvas in my design software. The screen was white, empty, waiting. For the first time in my life, the design was entirely up to me.